I'm not asking you to flip your lid. Do not go into red brain, but your blue brain, I'm going to ask it to be activated. Time to start setting strategies to help this child, your coaches, parents cope with the experience that they had.
How does a gym owner or a coach lead this conversation when they equally are going to have some trauma around this too?
This is a no-win situation. This is not something really anyone as a gym owner would be prepared for. We don't have, this has happened and this is what we're going to do.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Cheer Biz Podcast. This is a special impromptu episode that was inspired after this weekend of NCA Nationals 2025 in Dallas. I am here with Jeff Benson, and he has graciously, after I reached out to him yesterday and said, I think we need to get on and chat, joined me to give us some guidance and have a discussion about how best to proceed with your athletes and your families after this weekend. So, Jeff, thank you so much for spending some time with us. I know this is been a heavy weekend, and I know you've probably had a lot of people reaching out to you. So it means a lot that you're here with us and willing to sit down with our audience.
Thank you for inviting me. Appreciate it.
For those that are not aware somehow, this weekend there was an incident at NCA Nationals where there was reports of an active shooter in the venue, which caused a mass evacuation of the venue and a shutting down of the event for the rest of that day. There were sadly people injured in that mass exodus. There were people who were injured by the crowd. And then there's physical injuries that occurred. Luckily, it doesn't sound like anyone too seriously beyond, serious, yes, breaks. There were bone breaks and things I've heard of, and that is certainly a serious injury. But overall, it sounds like everyone will recover from what I've heard of. And obviously, doesn't sound like there have been no reports of anyone who lost their lives or anything like that, which although is a horrible thing to be grateful for, because it shouldn't have occurred in the first place. I am very grateful to have heard that it was a smaller amount of injuries. But there's the physical side, and then there's also the mental and emotional side of this experience, which I think is probably what we're going to talk the most about because Jeff is the master of mental resilience training and is the expert in the industry on this stuff. So, Jeff, you've talked to a lot of people. I guess, what is your knee-jerk reaction? What's your immediate response to where do we go from here to start healing?
That's a great question. When people were reaching out, my initial reaction was trying to convey the message that it's important that we as adults are modeling, but also embracing and allowing our athletes that grace to allow the emotions that would come up during an event like that. Immediately thinking, okay, it happened Saturday. I was assuming there was going to be a split. There were likely to be some people who were like, I am getting out of Dodge. Peace. This is just cheer. My kid, my family. We're going bare bones. Let's go. And then some people whose worlds, I'm going to just assume, are very cheer centric. And all they have is, okay, an event occurred. We need to get back to business and do our job and perform on Sunday, because for them, NCA probably is life or death. And so how do we blend our community together?
Yeah. And I know that I've seen a lot of stuff on social media in regards to people who had to make that tough decision as gym owners, as families, as programs, as coaches of, do we participate in a day two or do we not? And I know there's a lot of raw emotion on all sides. And I never want to discount how people feel. It was definitely, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, NCA was kind of in a no-win situation of like, if you host it, there are going to be the people who don't want to do it that will be unhappy. And if you don't host it, then there are going to be the people who want you to do it that are going to be unhappy. I lean towards giving people the option. I prefer give people the freedom of choice over just take it away for everyone. I can see how some people felt that that put them in like the position to have to be the bad guy. And I certainly understand that that also sucks. But where, yeah, I mean, what would you recommend in terms of now continued conversations post NCA with, hey, we made this decision and this was why we made the decision that we made, if there maybe isn't alignment in your program? Because that's certainly possible that a program that decided to compete may not have they may have competed, but everyone may not have aligned. I even know there are some programs that some athletes chose not to compete, and then they use some fill-ins and crossovers to make things happen. How do you move forward from, hey, I know we didn't align here, but there's still trust and communication and validation of feelings?
Yeah. I'm going to go back to my first point about grace and being able to recognize, as you are eloquently communicating, this is a no-win situation. This is not something really anyone as a gym owner would be prepared for. We don't have, this has happened and this is what we're going to do. And so I often use one of my tools in my tool belt as a sports performance consultant, how to have an eager conversation, really those crucial conversations that are really hard. And one of the first tools is extending empathy. So we're talking about the E of eager, to be able to extend empathy to whomever is in front of us. I talked about one side would be I can't believe you competed. I had to take my daughter home and now she's mad at me, or other people are mad at me for making this choice. To the flip side, which could be somebody as an owner, you're sitting down and having an eager conversation with a parent who spent all this money. What are you going to do about compensation, et cetera, and the feelings that they might have? And it is to, rather than feeling defensive as an owner, being able to explain where you were coming from, but also extending the empathy of why they may be having those emotions that they're having. It also brings me up, if you're okay with it, I want to use some common language.
Yes.
Would that be okay?
Yes. Yes, please.
So I guess I should slow that down just a little bit further. One thing that you and I have talked about is the importance of culture and intentional core values. So we're having an eager conversation. For those gym owners who have done the heavy work of setting intentional core values, I would tell you, hey, go there now. How did your choice get framed based on your core values? That is like, it's such an important tool to have, your guiding light really in making all gym choices, is having those core values. For those of you who have done it, air high five, great job. Use that as your compass. I promised I wanted to talk about some common language now. I often talk about red brain and blue brain. I think it's Dr. Sari Evans from the book Performing Under Pressure. This is not mine, so I do not want to take credit for it. But I really like his language. Red brain being the feeling, unconscious, immediate protection part of our brain. And our red brain's job, like we would do with our amygdala, is to protect us, fight, flight, freeze. So in these eager conversations, to make it a little bit lighthearted, red brain is that angry parent in front of us. Then we have our blue brain, and our blue brain is where our thoughts, good decision making occurs, being able to slow things down, have what we would call a dual focus, or being locked in. And keeping, now that we have this language, so you as a gym owner staying in your blue brain despite someone feeling red brain in this eager conversation. I want to bring this to, okay, so let's now put it in the context to this very traumatic situation. When I was not at NCA either, but when people heard what sounded like gunshots, when people started to react and being told to exit the convention center, and then there was mass hysteria, this is red brain.
Right.
For someone who has training like yourself, hopefully you're doing the math in your head, somebody who's had this sort of training, and maybe this would be helpful for your listeners if they don't already know, it'd be helpful for me. How are some people able to be in this very chaotic moment, but stay locked in and make good decisions? And that might be some people who have certain kind of training. Oh my gosh, I know of a gym owner who was there, who was able to get his kids to safety, and then find out they still have athletes in the convention center, and they went back in to get the kids because they had this training to stay in their blue brain and make good choices.
Yeah. So you mentioned, I don't know if we can pin that for a half a second. You said something about culture that I just wanted to touch on really quick, which, as you were mentioning your core values and leaning into those, it actually made me start thinking about my core values, and we lean very heavily in them and build an intentional culture. But I was wondering, what core value would I necessarily lean on if I had to make that decision? And I'm not sure. I might need to reevaluate my core values of what is, our big, like, it's a very common value. We use gym team self as like our number one, but is that at the right valuation in this moment? I don't even know. I'm not sure that leaning into gym team self in that kind of a decision-making process and saying, we're competing because it's gym team self. I don't love that personally. Like, I'm just thinking about how would I rationalize that? I mean, it might fall into like our never quit, but a lot of our core values are really centered around competition and building a competitive mindset and an athletic mindset, and not, I mean, we have like integrity as a value and those kind of things, but I'm just wondering, you raised an interesting point. So maybe you are also in the same position, sit and think about those core values, and would your core value, maybe one of our core values that isn't a core value is family first. I think that would be probably what we would lean into as like making our decision as a family first. It was interesting. Yeah, please.
A challenging question?
Yeah, let's go.
Often I talk with gym owners who are trying to get assistance setting these intentional core values for these extreme situations. Hey, I wish I had a roadmap. Core values are your roadmap. You have family first, but you also have team gym self.
Gym team self, yeah.
Gym team self, thank you. Which there's dissonance in that. Dissonance being the Grand Canyon between two values. And that's normal. That doesn't mean you have the wrong values. It is in those moments when we have two core values that are not aligned, how do we decide to move forward? And that's the work.
Yeah, we actually had this conversation in San Diego. I think I just haven't dove too deeply back into it, but it just raises it again. It's like, okay, this is something I need to continue to work on. So thank you, because that's awesome. So you had mentioned the people in regard to their ability to stay blue brain in crises, specifically that gym owner. And I also wanted to point out, I've heard so many stories of what are absolutely heroic actions. And the fact that there at this time is no evidence that there was someone shooting a gun trying to actually harm people in the convention center, that doesn't change that those people's actions in that moment were heroic. That because in their mind, they were going back into a building where they believed that someone was trying to harm their children and they stepped into that moment. I mean, I've heard countless stories. So just that one example, I'm saying all of those examples, all of those people who acted with the best intentions to protect and care for and stand in the way of danger. Like, I have so much respect for those people who made those decisions, despite the fact that, you know, you could be like, oh, well, it wasn't real. Well, in their mind, it was very real. And I think that's
Perception
something.
is reality, everybody.
Yes. Yes. So, which I think will go into some of the discussion about the move forward and the potential trauma of the mental side of it, because in that moment, it was very, very real. And so the decisions made were made with the perception that this is reality. In kind of answer to your question, for those that listen, you probably know, and I'll go more into this actually in some of the following episodes. I'll give you guys a little more background that I've never really gone into my history in police work and in the military. I've had some pretty traumatic events that I've been a party to. Ultimately, I do believe that with training and preparation, you can inoculate yourself to be able to stay in that blue brain mode, to be able to continue to think analytically and critically. I know some people don't like the words compartmentalize, but like compartmentalize that side and stay in a logical frame. Even with training, and I have been with officers who have had training, who have not, you see a varying degree. So I think to some extent there is also there is capability too in individuals. Like, we all have different things that we excel at and don't. Some of that is, I don't even know. I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I feel like to some extent it's kind of like you can train out the fight, flight, freeze a little bit. Like, you can work on it, but some of it is instinctive. And there are some people I've seen from training officers for years. There are some people that instinctively freeze, and there are some people that instinctively fight, and they've had no training or experience, but that's how their brain responds. Or there's some people who instinctively flee, like, and you can work on that through training and preparation, which I think is a takeaway from this. My concern being, in order to truly be prepared for something like this and trained to stay blue brain and stay analytical and logical and make sound, stay out of that amygdala as much as possible, I think you have to do a lot of training. And I don't know that we have the capacity to dedicate that time.
Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, everyone at NCA has now had a very real training experience because they've lived it, and lived experience can be a really good jumping off point for training and improvement.
Knowing that my background is in psychology, though I have a license as a marriage and family therapist, and I was at one point a practicing psychotherapist. I no longer wear that hat. I feel like I need to always. So I am now a sports performance consultant, but I still have the knowledge. I don't my knowledge doesn't get washed out. So I am coming at this with a psychology hat on. One of the models that I think really help maybe even explain, I'm sure there are a lot of you, wait, why are there some people who seemingly are not affected by this all the way to the other end of the spectrum? I've got kids who are still crying and it's Monday. And wait, it doesn't make any sense. There was no threat. Why are they still upset? I like to view things through a biopsychosocial lens, which means these biological factors that a lot of us come into the world with, like our genetic predisposition. You talked about our physiological responses, right? Like fight, flight, freeze. We all have a predisposition to one more than another. And then just our overall brain chemistry. So that biological factor starts to help us understand, yes, some people are going to act instinctively in different ways than others. And then we have that psychological factor. So people's coping mechanisms up until that point in time, their built-in resilience and previous traumas really help set the stage for what tracks have already been laid in this person's brain. We're going to go back to that. Everyone think like tracks are being laid in people's brains based on experiences. And when we talk about trauma in this realm, those kids, let's say 35,000, have tracks that are being laid. And the way that we as adults are responding to this trauma will either help lay positive tracks. Sure, it's not going to be roses and unicorns, but you can help use this. What did you call it? Not teachable moment. That's what I would say. What did you call it? Lived experience.
Yes.
To help form a more resilient child, not avoidance, which is actually going to cause more trauma, not repression, but being able to process this. Okay, so back on track now. Number 3, social. So our support networks, our social environment is also going to really set the stage for how we did respond and how we respond moving forward. So like our support network, what does the triad look like in our gym? So triad being coaches, parents, and then athletes. Our overall team culture and leadership is going to say a lot about our social factors and our ability to heal from this traumatic experience. And then just overall in the world, our social and cultural expectations. So communication, open dialogue, things like that.
So one of the things that I've been thinking about in this post situation, and I'm wearing 2 hats. I know you are too. I do have some prepared content to talk about actions to move forward from the safety perspective, because I have a lot of experience in that realm. And I go very much to always like, okay, how do we fix it mindset?
Mm-hmm.
I have some experience also. I have some experience also in traumatic experience. I served on our peer support team within the department, which is a very new horizon in law enforcement, because not long before I started, it was very much a like, drink a beer and figure it out kind of mindset, go through it on your own. And, but I've had the opportunity, fortunately, to be a part of group debriefs. What did we call them? There were 2 different styles. We would do an emotional debrief, and then we would do a tactical debrief. They were separate things. And so we would, anytime we were involved in a serious critical incident, so an officer involved shooting or potentially responded to a really traumatic crime scene, especially if like children are involved, there's often, or like an officer who had to perform CPR on a child or something like that, we might do a group debrief where we would bring everyone together and we would go around and everyone would just share, what their experience was and how they were feeling. That was it. It was just an open, if you feel comfortable, tell what you saw, what happened. And then we would go around and say, okay, now how are you doing? How are you dealing with this situation? And just the cathartic action of speaking it out loud and seeing that there are other people who are in the same zone and feeling the same experience with some outside people there to provide support was, I think, a very valuable process. And then we would go into the tactical debrief where we would talk, who did what specifically and how can we do better and who did great and, those kind of attaboy, attagirl approaches. But we kept those very separate. My questions with that are, 1, how do you think we should best have these conversations? 2, is a group style good? And 3, we always did it where there was the officers involved, and then there would be like 2 or 3 peer support officers who were not involved, and then someone leading it who was not involved. So how do we do this when everyone was there within our gym? How does a gym owner or a coach lead this conversation when they equally are going to have some trauma around this too.
Thank you for the challenging question. It absolutely lives up to that challenge. I would start with knowing that the person who is leading this must be in their blue brain. So when we're looking at that biopsychosocial lens, who is somebody who can lead support? And it might just be you need to invest in bringing someone else in who has more training than you on traumatic experiences. So this might be that social lens where you as a gym owner may be best served if everybody in your community is traumatized in some way, somebody who knows more than you. So reaching out to somebody in your community who can offer that support and wear the hat in that case as a therapist or a liaison.
Where might a gym owner start to look? Because I'm gonna stand up for my good friend Jeff here. It can't be Jeff.
Yeah, I am not offering my services to everybody.
It can't be Jeff for so many reasons, not the least of which being he's one person.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that this needs to be someone who's physically there, who can read the
1,000.
room, read the emotion, and guide. They have to be skilled, because not all indicators are going to be visible via a Zoom, especially when you have a large group of people. And you need someone who can be very strategic and even pause things when needed and say, hey, let's go ahead and pause right here and just take a quick little break, right? Then they can feel the room, and that's a sensation you can't have over Zoom. So where might someone start to look as a gym owner? What would you suggest? Because if they just put in psychologist.
Yeah. No. Psychology today is in the world of therapy in the US, because we got to remember there were UK gyms there were Canadian gyms there. But in the US, psychology today is a pretty good first step in finding somebody who is trained in dealing with trauma, and then maybe contacting them within your area to then do that deeper work.
Would you suggest making a process like this optional, or do you think that gym owners should push to make this like a mandatory event?
I think it's really important people are given the option. Trauma is often stamped in the brain by having lack of control. So to control and force somebody to sit through this, they may be in full red brain, everybody. That is not a ladder step that person is going to benefit from in a group setting. You could be re-traumatizing them. So I would, without a doubt, say it needs to be optional.
Now, I'm gonna pontificate, and you can tell me if it's what you would do, because that might be easier than asking questions. In my mind, I would do this. I would do one debrief for my staff. I would do something with my staff and my staff alone. I would do something for my athletes, and I might vary it. I might do a couple different ones for athletes. Like I might do one for athletes that were not physically at the venue at the time, but have some of that. I would then maybe do something for athletes who were there, but relatively easy to get, like they were with their parents and they were able to get out of the venue pretty simply. And then potentially something for the kids who were like scattered different directions and maybe on stage or something like that. And then another one for my parents where the kids are not present. I would want to invite parents for the one that the kids are at. Like, hey, you're welcome to be here, but this is going to be about the kids, and like we want you there to support your kid. But then I also want the parents to have an opportunity to go through their trauma and their conversation as well.
Yeah, that is a great display of triad high culture focus.
Would you suggest breaking it out any further, or do you think that's too much of a breakup?
It's really hard because it all depends.
Right.
Depends on how impacted were people in your community? Are most everybody in blue brain now and they've processed it? So then having this debrief really wouldn't hurt, but it's not really necessary versus we are still all in our red brain. We're living this trauma and it's like at the front of our brain. You may have to go even smaller because we may be triggering one another by just the recalling of memories. And remember, biopsychosocial, how many psychological factors in a positive way does the people in our gym come to us with? Does that make sense? I feel like I'm not using great words.
It
Like
made
what
sense to
coping
me.
strategies do they have?
Yes. Yeah.
What previous traumas do they have?
Mm-hmm.
So it all depends. I really wish there was one answer.
I'm with you. That was always my favorite answer as a law enforcement trainer. You know, they would be like, well, what if this? And I'm like, well, it depends because there's so many different factors. Would you suggest? So my gym was not there. We always go to NCA, but we had a local event 20 minutes from our gym with Worlds and Summit bids. And so we were like, why are we going to go all the way to Texas when we have an event right in our backyard, right? So we stayed local. Even though we weren't there though, I'm feeling like I might need to do some work in my gym because my kids all know, my families all know. What would you suggest? Is vicarious trauma a thing? And would you suggest gym owners who were not there even taking some sort of action?
100%. Kind of looking at the benefit of the storm to like frame this. For those who weren't there is the ability then for us to learn. I feel like we've all had the fear that these large cheerleading events could eventually experience something that could be even worse than they experienced in Dallas. So, especially someone like I'm going to go to, you're the expert of the physical safety. I feel like I am a pretty good resource for the mental emotional safety. Putting these two pieces together, I believe, is going to form the most solid foundation under the guise of cheerleading of how to deal with these situations.
I totally agree. So would you recommend that a gym that wasn't there do the same thing and reach out to some sort of trauma informed counselor and see if they can come in, or gauge it based off of the vibe that they feel within their program?
I would definitely make it a conversation. Not necessarily we are pulling in each element of the triad, but get a read on where people are at. I have a bias on talking about fear. This is a wonderful opportunity. Do you not talk about mental blocks? Do you not talk about performance anxiety? Are you a gym who, oh, it doesn't exist, these things aren't real, it just means you're weak, mentally weak? This might be the positive breaking point for you to go, these things happen in life, and maybe this is your opportunity to see, fear is real, regardless of what package you want to put it in. When an athlete's going through a mental block, when an athlete is throwing up on stage, when athletes are told to leave a venue, this is fear. This is all red brain. This is all amygdala. This is all flip. So use this as an opportunity to educate your staff, yourself, your kids, your parents on fear. This is the mental emotional piece. And then start using tools. Do you, as a high performing coach, do you talk about the importance of mindfulness, deep breathing, grounding techniques, the importance of relationship capital amongst your teams? These are the psychological, sociological factors that could help in the unlikely event that this occurs again. But it still could occur, and many of our red brains are wanting to prepare for if it does. And so let's now go to Dan Cotton here for what is our physical training, and is it necessary for every gym to do it and talk about it?
And yes, it's necessary to talk about it. That's a precursor to all my other content. It is absolutely necessary to talk about it. And even I'm taking away lessons learned here, everyone. And I'll talk about it because I don't want to spend too much time. I'm probably going to have 2+ hours of content on all of this. So I don't want to put it all in one video. But I've even learned lessons and said, I've been lax here because in comfort, we get lazy. And I've felt comfortable. And, it's never happened, so I don't have to worry about it kind of mindset. Now, I don't fully have that mindset. I'm always very aware of my surroundings. But, I've low propensity. I also understand that they're very low propensity events. They don't happen a lot, even though they're very publicized in the grand scope of the world and time and space. So I have a very analytical view of it because I spent a lot of time looking at data and looking at statistics. But statistics don't matter when you're in the statistic. It doesn't feel like when you're one of them, it doesn't feel like a small percentage. I'm hoping you don't give a it depends answer to this one, but it may be the only answer. One of the things I'm thinking about for gym owners and coaches and even parents is, what should they be prepared for moving forward? So we're going to hopefully everyone's going to listen to this and reach out and try and do some work within their gyms. I really hope that everyone takes the time to do that. But even doing the work, some tracks have already been laid. And I really think about those kids who, like the kids who are on stage, the kids who are in the warm-up room, because they're already in a yellow light kind of scenario where they're at stress. And now we flipped all their lids and we put them into red brain. And we've laid a track where now there's an association there. And without going into insane detail on it, I was involved in a violent incident at work, actually a week before NCA a number of years ago. And at NCA, I heard a very loud noise and had a borderline. I did not have a panic attack, but I had just gotten an Apple Watch and it was like, alert, 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 alert. Like your heart rate is insane. And I was very overwhelmed. And I have a lot of training and I've been in very scary circumstances, but that trauma that had just happened, that loud noise that sounded like a gunshot to me in the moment, in my, the back of my brain, hearing this noise, I instinctively had a biological response that I was in no control of. And I logically could look around and I went through my grounding exercises of like, there is no danger. I can see that, and I went through my process. But what can we prepare for, and what should we expect to potentially see from those kids who experienced this as we move forward and they get put in a scenario that may feel very similar, may trigger for the most random things? I mean, I've been triggered by smells. I was triggered by seeing a roof once and had to go through grounding exercises because the incident I'm talking about, the bad person was on a roof. And I just think of those kids who are like, well, they're going to go to the warm-up room again. They're going to be on a stage again. What should we be prepared for, and how can we respond to support those athletes and try to get them out of that red condition?
Okay. I'm going to break this up into 2 sections. So remind me if I don't get fully to yours. I feel like there's a precursor to this, which are, what are the signs of trauma that we need to look out for that could be occurring to let us know that the athlete is still living in the front of their brain, or even us as adults. I would start with, what are the physical reactions we're experiencing? How are they sleeping? Are they complaining of headaches, stomach aches? These are a lot of physical reactions that people who have signs of trauma experience.
Mm-hmm.
There are also behavioral changes that you might see. It could be from withdrawal, maybe withdrawal from their team, the dislike or the resistance to going to practice, being more quiet than before, not wanting to initiate in relationships that they before found pleasure or interest in, irritability, or even like emotional numbness or stunting are really big behavioral changes that you might see that somebody is starting to live in this world of red brain trauma, or the tracks are being laid. And finally, cognitive symptoms. If your child is really struggling with concentrating, if there is this constant worry or even avoidance, I absolutely do not want to talk about this. I cannot let, these are all signs of, okay, these are problematic things that are occurring. I'm not asking you to flip your lid. Do not go into red brain, but your blue brain, I'm going to ask it to be activated. Time to start setting strategies to help this child, your coaches, parents, cope with the experience that they had. So that's first, how do we know that this could be occurring? And then to your great question, okay, so what are some of the things that we can do, if I'm remembering this right? So Dan, please remind me, what are some things that we can now do, tools to deal with this very real response that we may have? We may not know we are traumatized, but all of a sudden we're triggered by 5 senses: smell, taste, touch, sight. Yeah. Am I remembering?
Yes. Yes. And I think you talked about what can we potentially expect. I think it is, if you see a kid suddenly crying at an event or getting sick, that normally doesn't, like an out of normal behavior for that athlete in that environment is letting us know it's that sign of there's some trauma there that we have to deal with. Unfortunately, at a cheer competition, like we're not going to be able to deal with all of that trauma. That takes time and investment and a lot of effort. So how do we help them in that moment?
I, as a sports performance consultant, would say, I'm going to challenge you first. What have you done as a precursor to these things? Have you now listened to the podcast and gone, ooh, we don't do a lot of, I call them physical strategies, breath work with our athletes. We don't do a lot of grounding. We don't talk about emotional regulation. We don't use, as Dan used earlier, stoplights. We're not using any of that language, and we just go into cheer as if it's cheer. You, unfortunately, are going to likely be the people who are going to experience a child in extreme red light being triggered, and they will have no tools. And it is often due to the fact that you didn't teach the tools. You know, Dan, from your experience in tactical things, you have to practice the actions you want in a high pressured situation. Coaches, cheer, this is my bias, cheer is meant to be a tool to help kids be successful in life. Because that is my bias, I look at this as, it's more than just cheer. That's the easier way to say it. If you are only talking about the sport, winning, etc., you're missing so much beauty, so much to be learned in this sport. So going back again to your question, it's important that in the moment, I'm going to use the champion-minded excellent gym owner. I'm going to speak to you. It is breathing. That is the first thing. Breathing, getting that child to get back to their breath. This often happens in these panic attack situations, knowing that panic attacks, usually the beginning, middle, and an end is about 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm. I didn't actually know that. That's good to know.
Yeah. Breathing exercises are number one. Then for you, I mean, you're naming them. Are you wanting me to do other ones? I feel like I'm like stealing from your tool belt.
You're not stealing from my tool belt. I'm stealing from other people's and then just trying to sound intelligent. I think we talked on the previous episode way back when, but not to make people go back and dig. I the first time I heard grounding, I was like, that's stupid. And then, right, like Macho Dan was like, that's dumb. And then I needed to do it. And I was like, wow, that works. Can you give the listeners who may not know grounding a real quick, this is an approach, this is something you can tell your athletes to do for grounding?
When I think of grounding, I think of the 5-4-3-2-1 minute, 5-4-3-2-1 method. And it is list 5 things you see. And right now, what I would do, I would be grabbing the athlete's hand. I'm kneeling down, looking at them in their eyes, and I am modeling deep diaphragmatic breathing. So I'm going, can you list 5 things that you see right now? And I, being in blue brain, am trying to model for them calm, slow breaths. I'm trying to be, this is the mirror neurons. You had referred to them, but you didn't say it. How we impact each other, which is why you would want a therapist there live and in person. Mirror neurons. Stunted here across screens. After they list 5 things that they see, and you're going to start seeing them. Usually it's a sigh. That is a really good sign of red brain starting to calm. Good, nice. I'm speaking in a slow, controlled way. Now, 4 things you can touch. I might or feel touching. Your feet on the ground, your feet in your shoes, and you may, depending on where the ladder steps the athlete is, they may not even know what you're saying. So you would guide them. Right now, I want you to pay attention to feel my hands. Do you feel my hands? Yes, squeeze my hands. Ooh, squeeze them tight. Good. Now, make your hands like a feather. So I'm really trying to get them into their body, into the present moment. Remember, red brain is going to be past and future. Panic attacks are usually a future thought. So we want to go in the blue brain, which is present moment focused. Moving to 3 things you can hear. What do you hear? Sometimes if I'm immediately going, what I hear might be what's traumatizing me. And that is with me, come back. Oh, that was a really good breath. Yeah. Okay. All right, good. Listen to my voice. So you're going to direct them to the away thing to listen to my voice. Good. Nice. And then we might move on to what are 2 things you can smell, all the way to 1 thing you can taste. And then I might even, because I'm going to have tools in my tool belt, I might have a Sour Patch, bag of Sour Patch Kids, because I, as a coach, know that kids get stressed, and it is often very helpful. So, hey, everybody, listen to this. It is often very helpful to have these very intense flavors, intensely salty, intensely sour, to knock us into the present moment. So I might have a Sour Patch Kid. Allergic, note, make sure they're not allergic to. And then we would talk about what does it feel like on your tongue? What do you notice? Things like that to help really ground them to the present moment.
On that, I think we're going to stop because we've been going for 50 minutes, and I'm hoping that we gave people a lot of really actionable information. Jeff, I cannot thank you enough, and the wealth of knowledge that you present to this industry is just amazing. Is there anything else that you want to leave the listeners with before we go?
It is the same reminder that really we started with. It is important that we are creating biopsychosocial, a social culture experience where emotions can be processed and there's not a label associated with it. A lot of us have this misperception of only tough people can deal with these big things. And so our athletes, our gas pedal athletes, want to like be tough. Y'all, tough often leads to trauma. It leads to the avoidance of what you actually experienced. And strength, this is my bias, strength actually comes from being able to communicate by modeling our emotional regulation as an adult. Openly communicating that was hard for me, that was difficult, providing them stability, really go back and focus on team unity and supporting one another. And then again, reach out to professional help when necessary. Do not try and white knuckle your way through this with the shoulds.
I love it. Jeff, thank you so much. I hope everyone got something great out of this, and hopefully we can all move forward together as a community and support one another. And my biggest thing on social media, I've seen a lot, what Jeff said at the beginning, empathy. Just be empathetic. Like, everyone has their own feelings and their experience, and just allow them to feel that. You don't need to correct people's emotions. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining, and we'll catch you on the next episode.